Well, they've been fighting for months, but did President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell actually just call a truce? We'll take a look at whether they broke bread during their lunch at the White House. Then, even more accused are stepping forward against Harvey Weinstein. And more critics, they're pointing fingers at the New York Attorney General and asking why Eric Schneiderman didn't pursue a case against the movie mogul and, more specifically, the New York District Attorney. Also, a major development in corruption trial of Senator Bob Menendez. We'll take a look at whether it spells trouble for the New Jersey Democrat. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A lot to get to in the next hour, so let's begin, though, where else but the White House, where it was a kumbaya of sorts. That after months of feuding with congressional Republicans, President Trump, he had lunch with Mitch McConnell today and afterwards said they're just great between both him and the Senate Majority Leader. Take a listen.
My relationship with this gentleman is outstanding, has been outstanding. We are working very hard to get the tax cuts. We will continue to work hard to get the health care completed. I'm going to be surprising some people with an economic development bill later on, but I haven't even told Mitch because I want to focus on tax cuts and some other things right now.
That's a pretty big difference from this summer when the Senate failed to pass an Obamacare repeal. Back then, the president tweeted out criticism of McConnell, pointing out that he couldn't get the job done. And the president and McConnell, they're also on the same page regarding Senate Republicans and trying to help incumbents keep their jobs. On the other side, well, that would be Steve Bannon. You remember, Trump's former top strategist. Here is Bannon at the Value Voters Summit this weekend.
This is not my war. This is our war. And you all didn't start it. The establishment started it. But I will tell you one thing, you all are going to finish it.
By the way, Bannon name-called both McConnell and other sitting Republicans, saying they had to hit the bricks. Well, today, the president said he will try to convince Bannon to stay out of it.
Steve is doing what Steve thinks is the right thing. Some of the people that he may be looking at, I'm going to see if we talk him out of that because, frankly, they're great people.
Then McConnell chimed in saying the GOP has to run mainstream candidates, not people on the fringes.
Our operating approach will be to support our incumbents and in open seats to seek to help nominate people who can actually win in November.
Listen, it's not a shocker when I say we have a divided country. It's an open secret. But there are ways to unite people. That's something Chris Gibson writes about in his new book. Former Republican New York congressman, he was seen as the most moderate Republican in the House while he was there. In his book, he talks about both President Trump, the state of the GOP, and much more. In the book, Rally Point, 5 Tasks to Unite the Country and Revitalize the American Dream, we covered those issues and a lot more with former New York congressman. Now, before we talk about the ways to do it, let's at least assess the patient. How is America right now? I know I've seen you say in other points we are at crossroads. How so, and just how divided are we?
Well, we're deeply divided. I mean, that was evident. But if that would be one thing if that's all we were experiencing. But what's different from other times when we have had significant challenges and been divided is there's a very prevalent feeling that our system is rigged. Whether you were at a Trump rally or a Bernie Sanders rally, mainstream Americans think the system doesn't work for them, both politically and economically, and that has actually eroded our confidence. This is the passion behind Rally Point. I'm really concerned. I've never known of a time when we have lacked the confidence to overcome. I'm actually optimistic that if we adopt some reforms, some very meaningful and significant reforms, we will restore the balance, and we will also restore the relationship between our representatives and their constituents and the government and the people. And so we have to commit. I mean, my party has generally been reluctant to embrace some of the political reforms that I'm advancing here today, and I'm talking about term limits, independent redistricting, and campaign finance reform of the right kind. I'm not for public financing of campaigns, but I am for campaign finance reform in view of the spirit of one person, one vote.
Well, I want to get to some of those remedies in the book, but how much of this how much of the buck stops at the president's desk, in that by no means did I think that this was kumbaya in the nation's capital before the last election. But in my lifetime, I've never seen a candidate, let alone a president, who has sowed such doubt in the legitimacy of government itself, of media who covers him, who points out things that are untruths that either he has said or his administration's done, calling it all fake news and telling people disbelief, let alone sow so much division in this country, whether it be on racial fault lines or other. If we have a problem with unity in this country, how much of it lies at the feet of the president? Well,
he's certainly not making it better. But as I point out in the book, we've been struggling for decades. This is not a new phenomenon. We had issues of major divide during the Obama presidency. And if you go back prior to Obama, George W. Bush, same. You know, and increasingly, really for the last 7 decades, but especially in the last 2 decades, nearly all of our political change, our major political change comes by way of the president. Executive orders and actions in the bureaucracy, rules and regulations. And what that does is that denies us the natural process of having to accommodate with each other. The legislative process requires us to work together. Look at today, Donald Trump, he claims that he's done more to change this country than any recent president. Well, he's just making my point, because he hasn't enacted one significant piece of legislation in 9 months. So he's reinforcing this point that political change comes by way of executive orders and actions. Richard, fundamentally, that is tearing us apart. We need to get back to basics of rule of law.
To that end, though, I'll play devil's advocate with you. Everything you said is empirically true. But if you're the president, whether you were Obama or now Trump, you'd say, I have such a polarized Congress through gerrymandering, with almost limited exceptions. They're all safe seats, and they're going to do vote red, vote blue, in effect, not even party. It's so hard to get anything done. The only way I can affect change is through executive orders. What do you say to them when they turn around and say to you, I'd love to do what you're saying, Chris, but every time I try and do it, I can never get a simple majority for anything?
Yeah, I understand that explanation, but I don't believe that that's the possibility here. Look, I saw men and women, when I gave the order to move forward under fire, the key thing is I went first, and I said, follow me. People believe the system is rigged. And so you ask them to sacrifice, and they're like, sure. Well, whoever it is not sacrificing. They believe that they're being asked to do more than anybody else. So with leadership, we can turn this around, and we absolutely can get those representatives to come together.
Finally, I know that you're not going to be running for governor. A lot of people would have liked to have seen your name get thrown into the ring. And you'll say when your kids get a little older, you and your wife will reassess it at the time. But if you did as what? And by that I know you're a proud Republican and have always been and have no intention of being otherwise. But when you look at what happened in Alabama, you were one of the vanishing moderates that was in Congress that were Republicans. Is there still a place for a moderate in the modern GOP or not?
Not only a place, but a leadership role. I firmly believe this, that if this vision in Rally Point is given the proper audience, I believe you'll see absolutely Republicans will rally around it, but more than that, you'll find independents and a fair number of Democrats will rally around this too. Because when you talk about what it is to be conservative, what are we conserving? We're conserving founding principles, which at the very beginning of our country was considered by the world to be liberal. What do you mean by liberal? Well, it believed in you. We believed in people. We believed that we could be self-governing. We didn't need a state to tell us what to do. So when we talk about conserving, that's what we're talking about. If not all, that's a vision that 65 to 70% of the country will rally around.
Well, speaking of rally, the book, Rally Point, Chris Gibson, I appreciate the time. Thank you very much, and good luck with the book.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, and it should be noted, I'm a big Chris Gibson fan, but to think that in today's day and age, a moderate would have a leadership position, I think, is wishful thinking, but I certainly think we could use a little bit of cooperation on Capitol Hill, but doesn't look like any time soon, because you take your cue from the head of the party, and the president is the head of today's GOP. In his news conference this afternoon that lasted more than 40 minutes, it covered a whole lot of topics. He was asked, among other things, about Puerto Rico. And of course he said, what else, but he's doing a great job. He also took jabs at the beleaguered island. Take a listen.
Puerto Rico is very tough because of the fact it's an island, but it's also tough because, as you know, it was in very poor shape before the hurricanes ever hit. Their electrical grid was destroyed before the hurricanes got there. It was in very bad shape, was not working, was in bankruptcy, owed $9 billion. You're going to have to build a whole new electrical plant system. We now actually have military distributing food, something that really they shouldn't have to be doing.
Remember, 3.5 million Americans in Puerto Rico. I'm not so sure the president knows that number. But anyway, he went on and he slammed Hillary Clinton. It wouldn't be a press conference without it, for this time daring to disagree with him when it came to NFL protests. Hillary said the players are not disrespecting the flag, but this is what the Donald had to say.
When you go down and take a knee or any other way, you're sitting, essentially, for our great national anthem. You're disrespecting our flag, and you're disrespecting our country. And the NFL should have suspended some of these players. And if Hillary Clinton actually made the statement that, in a form, sitting down during the playing of our great national anthem is not disrespectful, then I fully understand why she didn't win.
Now, of course, it wouldn't be a Trump news conference without at least one whopper. You never know where they're coming from, but this one had to deal with, of all things, how he handles the families of fallen soldiers in the wake of 4 U.S. servicemen that were killed in Africa. Now, he made this, trust me, totally substantiated claim about what his predecessors did.
The traditional way, if you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls. I like to call when it's appropriate, when I think I'm able to do it.
Completely not true, by the way. And by the way, the president, it should be noted, has never been to Dover Air Force Base when the fallen come home, something his predecessors, Republican and Democrat alike, have done but haven't publicized it. I'm sure that may not be the case with the current occupant, but I digress. The current president was also asked about the Harvey Weinstein scandal and sexual assault allegations against him. Against the president, that is. And the president, well, he disregarded that, said it was what else but fake news. He also said he'd like to see the Russia investigation end, as there was no collusion and the American people are sick of it, but he said he won't fire special counselor Bob Mueller. How good of him. All right, let's bring in our panel. Two of our favorites, Shelley Mayer, she's a Democratic Assemblywoman representing Yonkers. Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent, looking around. That's right, talking about you. I don't know where to start, but I guess let's start with the politics, which is the strange fellows aspect of it. Shelley, Mitch McConnell has been a punching bag for this president. Every time there's a failure, whether it be health care or whatever the case may be, it's never the president's own fault, it's Mitch McConnell's.
And he will be again.
And today, there's simpatico. We need current incumbent Republicans to win come November, et cetera, et cetera. But you kind of sense it's with a wink and a nod, because he certainly seems to be pouring some of the accelerant on the fire that Steve Bannon's laid.
Oh, absolutely. And it won't last. We all know it won't last. I mean, one thing about this president, he's very erratic in his loyalties. And I think that he's been very damaging, in my opinion, to the legislative process and not a partner to the Republicans. And I think many of them would tell you that. He disrupts their abilities to move their own agenda forward or to work with him. He has not shown leadership on the legislative side. Then they have to stand there, frankly, because Mitch McConnell doesn't have the guts to call out someone who has disrupted their ability. I mean, they are in leadership. They could get stuff done, but they can't get stuff done because the president keeps messing it up. And they should call him out. Honestly, how long will we go with this sort of dance of pretending we're all simpatico, as you said? That will fall apart the next time the Senate doesn't do what Mr. Trump wants. I think it's very dismaying, and it's very hard to have sort of perspective and a sense of humor. This is really tears at the fabric of the process which Americans want to believe in, that Congress works with leadership. Okay, we elected this president. He should work with the Congress and get stuff done. We aren't seeing that happen. I happen to be a Democrat, and very proudly so. They're in power. Get stuff done. If they can't get it done, then work with the Democrats on a bipartisan basis. But I do think that we shouldn't minimize this sort of false friendship, because it's meaningless, in my opinion.
Oh, I would even go beyond that. I would say you take the president's public pronouncements with a grain of salt or at your own peril, because we know that he likes to put on a public show. We know that he likes to represent a public face where everything's competent and working and functional and happy and everybody's on the same page. I'm pretty sure Bob Corker, one of the guys who works with Mitch McConnell in the Senate, would disagree with some of the positions that McConnell took. They have vested interests jointly. They all need tax reform to pass for their own political futures, and because that's what their moneyed interests that have funded all of their campaigns want. That's the constituency they're speaking to. So they have things that they want to get on the same page about, and they will work together as best they can. But, I do not believe that there is all of a sudden a simpatico working relationship between Mitch McConnell and President Trump based on today's press conference.
But it's not just, okay, Bob Corker said that it's basically adult daycare at the White House every day. That was his own words. He's a senior Republican. He runs a foreign relations committee, one of the more influential folks on Capitol Hill. He said this president, left to his own devices, could start World War III. Again, there's no hyperbole when I say any of these things. They came on the record with audio and video of Bob Corker when he said it. But it's John McCain. Mm-hmm. He's suffering cancer treatment, brain cancer treatment, and the president's going after him. Senator Flake, he went after him as well. These are all Republicans that I'm naming here. Then he goes after the majority leaders. Yes. He went after leadership, not just Paul Ryan in the House, but Mitch McConnell as well. But to me, the tell was Alabama. In Alabama, the president, he went on the stump. He went out for Luther Strange, who was the incumbent. Recently, he came in after Jeff Sessions took the job of the administration. We all know how that's going for Jeff Sessions. But anyway, nonetheless, he was Luther Strange's friend until all of a sudden the numbers started coming in. And then that unwavering support of the president, he deleted the Twitter account the night of the election and then said, I was led down the wrong road. Roy Moore, who beat him in the primary, is legitimately insane. I mean, right of Attila the Hun here, twice when he was the Attorney General, he was stripped, or the Chief Judge, I should say, excuse me. So I don't know what Trump really wants, because there's two schools of thought, Shelley. One is you keep the Republican incumbents here because you need your numbers. You can't lose any more seats. Conversely, if he's got a bunch of folks that are as willing to go over the edge with him as much as he can, maybe they're more in tune with him. But the problem is he's trying to pick off Republicans that always vote Republican. These aren't any of the ones who voted against any of the Trump initiatives. But it's crazy math.
He has this problem, and this is the narrative. I don't frankly know how big this so-called base is, that he's got to play to this very energized, hyper anti-Republican establishment base. And he has Bannon now from the outside telling him to do it. I am not convinced that this base is so large, and yes, they're vocal, and yes, they made a difference in the last election, a significant one. I do not believe that many Trump voters, as we were speaking, remain loyal to Trump. I think they're embarrassed by him. I think they are counted in the base, and they are no longer in the base. I think there is a miscalculation of his popularity. I think it continues to decline. And I think he is playing to what he thinks he needs to do, but I think he will be sadly mistaken.
Depends on what their other options are, those voters.
Yep. We'll learn a lot, certainly this fall. All right, coming up next, we touched on this briefly, but more women now accusing Harvey Weinstein of sexual abuse or sexual assault. Weinstein's career, it's in ruins here, but the question is, will criminal charges follow, and what about the Manhattan DA? Did he drop the ball?